I'll make a deal with everyone since, one after another, if we take a moment to stand up and stretch a bit, the deal is as long as you agree not to walk out. So everybody stand up for a second, take a moment, loosen up a little bit, and then I've got 10 minutes of action-packed insights for you. All right, feeling good? Move around. Oh, you have to be still. All right, good. So really excited to chat about this topic of burnout. We've heard it in the form of quiet quitting. We've heard many terms for it. But one of the things that I want to talk about in particular is uncertainty. And as we transition from the last session, how uncertainty is impacting the worker, what the implications are for organizations, how we can support our leaders in particular during times of uncertainty to equip them to be successful in the environment that we're in. And just to give you a little perspective on what we do, ExecOnline pioneered online leadership development in the corporate enterprise. So 10 years ago, if you went to a company and said, you should develop your leaders online, you would get a lot of blank stares. Leaders have to be developed in person, of course, and we changed that. And our goal in doing that was to connect all leaders to their future potential and change access to development from something that was offered just to a handful of folks to something that could be offered to everyone. And our view was that as the world changes, that's going to become increasingly important because you're going to be defined as individuals and organizations by your ability to learn faster than the pace of change. And this is what we call the learning economy. And so if you think about success in the current environment, so much of it is driven by how well you can manage change. So you've heard it in the context of agility, you've heard many different words for it, but to us, it comes down to learning. You're consistently facing new challenges. COVID brought that to the fore, but it was certainly before COVID and it'll be after COVID. There always seems like there's the next thing, right, that we've got to manage. And if you're an organization and you can't figure out how to, at scale, address learning to keep up with the pace of change, you're going to lose your competitive advantage. And if you're an individual and you can't learn faster than the pace of change, you will lose your competitive advantage. If you can, now the good news is, if you are learning faster than the pace of change, there's tremendous opportunity to extend individual and organizational advantage. And so how do you do that institutionally? This is something that organizations are grappling with right now. If you think about quiet quitting, for example, what I think is underneath that is a lack of confidence in individuals and their ability to respond to the environment that they find themselves in. And so organizations that aren't invested in those individuals are going to find more and more quiet quitting within their organizations because individuals aren't equipped. And then if we sort of jump ahead to what we mean more specifically about the types of capabilities that particularly leaders and organizations will need to be successful in this learning economy, we call it our future-ready leader capability set. So one is business model transformation and the ability to lead that within your organization. Business models are getting reimagined and redeveloped every few years now. And if you are a leader and you don't have the ability to adapt to that change, be able to adapt your part of the business to that change and then communicate that to your teams, you will fall behind. So managing business model transformation. This data suggests that almost 70% of leaders over the last couple of years, COVID being a big driver, has had to reimagine how they access their customer, which is fundamental to your business model in order to be successful. The second is prioritizing inclusion and diversity. And in a couple of sessions ago, we heard a lot about diversity versus inclusion. One of the things you hear all the time is diverse teams are higher performing teams. It's also true that diverse teams are the lowest performing teams. And the difference is inclusive leadership. If leaders can lead inclusively, they can harness the power of diversity. Now, the good news is if you look at this data point, we actually track from tens of thousands of leaders their response to the question, how well do your peers manage inclusively? And we've seen this consistently tick up over the last 2 years. This number used to be in the 50s. Now it's over 70%. There's some question around whether that's true inclusive leadership and whether there's still a lot of work to be done. We certainly think there is, but there's some cause for optimism. And then the final piece is, how do you manage empathetically? So we talked about this, sort of burnout issue. Look at this data point. Almost 90% of leaders cite burnout as a critical challenge in their organizations right now. And they're on the front lines of meeting people where they are, understanding the challenges they're facing, and helping them manage the change, not just in their organizations, but also in their personal lives, right? And so that set of capabilities is really challenging to find in a single leader. And so when you think about the learning economy, that's what we're talking about, the need to build these future-ready skill sets. And just as we thought we were kind of getting our arms around this environment, you now have economic volatility, right, thrown into the mix. And when you think about economic volatility, traditionally the way that organizations have responded is to disinvest in talent, right? Because the idea is, well, people, they're stuck here. They're not going to be able to find a job somewhere else. We don't have to invest in development programs, coaching, all the things that we might have done in the past. This period of volatility is fundamentally different. So what we're seeing is organizations are facing talent pressures they haven't faced before. You still have tight labor markets across critical skill sets. You still have leaders that are burned out more than ever before. And so organizations are saying, well, normally in an economic downturn, I would disinvest, but we're seeing more and more C-suites say, we actually need to invest affirmatively in order to secure our talent and position our talent for success in an organization where everyone needs to learn faster than the pace of change. Now, what's really interesting is when you think about what it takes to manage in a volatile environment, what we find is that you typically need two sets of skills. You need strategic prioritization skills, and you need talent engagement skills. And those talent engagement skills are more important than ever before in a virtual environment, in an environment where people are dealing with high amounts of change, and we can no longer expect that to subside. It's sort of the new normal. Now, what we find is if you map the set of skills that you need on both sides of this, the strategic prioritization skills around strategic thinking, judgment, decision-making, you combine that with the skills you need for talent engagement, the ability to have perspective taking, be empathetic, only 5% of leaders possess that full range of skills. So when you go back to that future-ready leadership capability set that we talked about earlier, and then you combine that with the period of economic volatility we're in, huge implications for organizations in terms of how you upskill your leadership talent to address the current moment. So just a couple of implications to think about when you're kind of considering this future of work, and in particular implications for learning and development organizations and HR organizations that are trying to figure out, what do I do with this data? How do I create future-ready leader capabilities at scale? Well, the first implication is really what we call development equity. And this is something that we've pioneered with dozens of organizations that we work with to define equitable access to development. So think of this as pay equity for development. And this is something organizations have not traditionally considered. But ultimately, if we're in a world where you must learn faster than the pace of change systematically across your organization, and you're not distributing development opportunity equitably, you're going to backslide on all of your representation goals. Particularly as you start to think about the leadership levels of organizations, people will not move through in an equitable manner if you're still in this old mindset of we're only going to distribute development for the few, and if you're not measuring the success of your ability to deliver development for all. So first is development equity. How are you measuring equitable access? The second is what we call continuous learning. And this is a shift for L&D organizations. L&D organizations have traditionally been very episodic in terms of how they provide access to training and development opportunity. i.e., if you're an employee, if you're a leader, maybe we touch you once every few years with a development intervention, and that's the best we can do. The beauty of digital is that you can actually get a lot more continuous with the learning that you distribute, and you can do it at scale. And there are already professions that recognize this. If you're a doctor, if you're a CPA, there's kind of this expectation that every year you're burnishing your skills and keeping up with what's current. Our belief is that that should be distributed across organizations if you really want to get ahead of the learning economy and equip your teams to be successful at scale. And then the final piece is the shift in L&D to business enabler, from really thinking less as a centralized function and more as a consultant to the business, with a POV on one, what are the critical skills that each part of the business needs to stay ahead of the learning economy? And secondly, how are we going to measure our ability to close those skill gaps in a way that is tied back to business impact? And so the ability of L&D organizations to do that at scale is the difference between having a seat at the table and not. And so when we think about the three key implications of this learning economy and how we equip leaders to be successful in a world where they'll constantly be challenged to learn and develop new skill sets, distributing access equitably, meeting the moment in terms of really continuous learning as opposed to episodic learning, and then finally demonstrating the ROI of your investments in ways that make sure that L&D is seen as a strategic partner around the table. And the beautiful thing is that because of the moment we're in now, in the conversations we're having with CEOs and C-suites and boards, there's more of a recognition of this as an opportunity to really invest in talent, but that opportunity has to be leveraged and proven, right, from an impact perspective in order to stick over time. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And hope you enjoyed the stretch and the 10 minutes.